Final Fantasy VII Rebirth features a detailed and sophisticated gameplay system. It serves as a subtle evolution on the lauded combat system that featured in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which in itself was a masterful action-orientated interpretation of the combat system that featured in the original version of Final Fantasy VII. One of the most important and impressive aspects is that each of the original playable characters saw their core traits and characteristics transferred into a real-time environment. And as the main protagonist, it's for this reason that a lot of focus gets placed on Cloud Strife, and why the developers have spent so much time ensuring that his gameplay style resonates with as many people as possible. When we surveyed almost 14,000 people after the launch of Remake about their thoughts, Cloud Strife's gameplay was rated as the highest, with a score of 92%. But as thoughts turned to Rebirth, we felt it would be prudent to produce a guide that serves as a refresher, as even though some aspects of Cloud's gameplay have stayed the same, the developers have also made some crucial modifications to give Cloud even more utility. To start things off, we're going to look at Cloud's offensive toolkit. Wielding a gigantic sword, it's no surprise that Cloud is designed as a melee combat specialist, with fast sword swings used to build up the ATB gauge and deal moderate damage. The standard melee combo is composed of 5 strikes, with the middle and final strikes dealing boosted damage compared to the initial strikes. Cloud then has a new move, which can be accessed by holding down the standard attack button. This allows Cloud to deliver a pseudo AoE strike, as it can damage all surrounding enemies, and even lift smaller enemies into the air while putting them closer. Due to the introduction of this move, Cloud can then create a 6-strike combination, as once the initial combo concludes, the attack button can then be held down for a quick flourish at the end to deal extra damage and hit multiple targets at the same time. Now, one of the combat challenges Cloud faced within Remake was related to distance. Due to being a close-range melee striker, even though Cloud did have a high degree of mobility, he would struggle when targets were too far away or were aerial. To avoid these situations feeling frustrating, the developers have now given Cloud a ranged attack combo, and what's good is that this has multiple functions. Cloud's ranged strikes can be initiated by performing an evasive move. Pressing attack straight after evading will see Cloud launch beam waves from his sword. Outside of allowing Cloud to attack a new array of enemies, what's also cool is that these beam waves are magical, and this means Cloud has the option to switch between using physical and magical attacks on a whim. This does then propose another scenario. What if you want to attack an aerial target with physical damage as opposed to magical damage? Well, that's why another option has been implemented. After performing an evasion, if the standard attack button is held down, Cloud will launch himself towards the targeted enemy. And this will happen whether the target is on the ground or in the air. Once the distance has been closed, Cloud will then revert back to using standard physical attacks. And even though the combo may look different, it has the same utility as the standard physical combo. The other fun aspect around this is that the launch move can be initiated at any point during the beam wave combo. You just have to hold down the standard attack button and Cloud will adjust accordingly. When looking at the other side, Cloud is one of the better defensive characters due to the high mobility exhibits when in operator mode. This mobility can make a huge difference when attempting to avoid damage, especially when enemies telegraph their moves. In this scenario, it's often easiest for Cloud to just run away from the target area. If time is of the essence, however, then Cloud also has a very effective evasive maneuver that can be used by pressing the circle button. This allows Cloud to cover a pretty substantial distance, and if you're close enough to the enemy when evading, then Cloud will even deal a small amount of chip damage and gain some ATB charge at the same time. The other default defensive ability for Cloud is the standard block, but due to Operator and Punisher mode existing, its functionality can differ. When in Operator mode, Cloud will perform a conventional block that reduces the amount of damage taken, while adding a small amount of ATB charge in the process. And should the block be initiated with the correct timing, then Cloud will perform a parry that will nullify incoming damage and induce a small stun on the parried enemy. It's Punisher mode where things will differ, however. Much like in Remake, when in Punisher mode, Cloud becomes quite immobile, only able to creep forward in the specified direction. This is deliberate, as Cloud is anticipating a strike, ready to pounce with a devilish counterattack. However, this only works if the incoming damage is classified as physical and melee. If the incoming damage is magic or ranged, Cloud will take the full brunt, as opposed to if it was being blocked in Operator mode. This makes blocking in Punisher mode high risk, high reward, and should the incoming damage be something that can be countered, then it can also double up with parry to nullify incoming damage and still deliver that devilish counterattack. To complement these basic offensive and defensive actions, Cloud comes equipped with a handful of abilities that can be used by spending ATB bars. The first, called Braver, was one of the primary damage-dealing abilities available to Cloud in Remake. It serves as a natural ode to the limit break that Cloud started with in the original Final Fantasy, and it has the exact same application. When selected, Cloud will deliver a strike that deals massive damage in comparison to any of the regular ATB building standard strikes. As a way of quantifying just how much extra damage Braver does, it will deliver approximately 4 times more damage than the regular combo-ending attack, and it will deliver approximately 50 times more damage than one of the weak combo starting attacks. The other unique aspect around Braver is that it will deal more damage when used in the air. So if you're able to manipulate the gameplay environment to raise Cloud off the ground, then using Braver will deal more damage to any ground enemies due to the addition of gravity to the equation. In terms of typical usage, while Braver can be used as part of the regular attack rotation, it's much more effective if used when the target is staggered. At a minimum, this will cause Braver to do 60% more damage, but if you're able to increase the stagger percentage, then Braver can become even more effective. And because its wind-up time is quite short, it can be great as a cheeky last hit before the stagger window closes. The second ability of note is Triple Strike. Unlike in Remake, where Triple Strike needed to be learnt from the Iron Blade, it's available to Cloud right at the start of Rebirth by default. Whereas Braver is great for dealing punishing damage when an enemy is staggered or when trying to brute force down a single strong opponent, Triple Strike comes into its own when squaring off against a large group of enemies. The basic premise is that Triple Strike will attack 3 enemies in succession, and each strike will deal more damage than the last. This means it's great at applying consistent damage to a group of enemies, and if they're bunched up, then Cloud can even strike them all multiple times. Triple Strike also excels because Cloud will strike the enemies no matter where they are, and this makes it quite effective for closing the distance on airborne enemies. Not only that, but if Cloud attacks an airborne enemy last, he can stay on them to continue applying the pressure. The final ability available to Cloud at the start of the game is Focused Thrust. This ability returns from Remake, where it was also associated with the Buster Sword, and it's for that reason that it's not auto-learnt at the start of this game. Once you've fulfilled the requirements, it can be used by Cloud when equipping any weapon, but that's not much of a concern for a while. Until then, Focused Thrust can be used without issue, and you'll want to use it on a semi-regular basis as it's perhaps one of the best abilities in the game. The main objective around using Focused Thrust isn't so much around dealing immediate damage, it's instead designed to increase an enemy's stagger gauge at a faster rate, while also applying some pressure. And because of this, should an enemy become pressured, then Focused Thrust is an absolute dream, as it will fill the stagger bar at a tremendous rate. The only downside is that due to how the ability executes, it does need the right kind of setup. It's great against enemies that are quite slow, but it can sometimes be difficult to land against enemies that have high mobility or are airborne. Still, once an enemy is pressured, there is often a short window where they become vulnerable, and that's the perfect time to land Focused Thrust. Within Chapter 2, Cloud will also gain access to Firebolt Blade via the Sleek Saber, which can be found at the abandoned dock. When used, Cloud's sword gets imbued by fire and lightning elements, and he can deal numerous high-impact strikes while also flying into the air. But because of this, Firebolt Blade is quite a situational ability. To maximise its effectiveness, you'll need to assess enemies to determine whether they either have fire or lightning elemental weaknesses. If they do, then Firebolt Blade can be a real asset, as it will do enhanced damage and will therefore increase chance of initiating a pressure situation. Those weaknesses can also be exploited during a stagger. And this means that Firebolt Blade is a very strong option when staggered, as it has the potential to deal more damage than Braver. Now, within the first few chapters of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, things will be quite limited in terms of the Folio system, as your party and weapon level won't be all that high. However, even with those restrictions, there are specific areas of focus for improving Cloud's utility. From the initial starting point, you're going to want to learn Firework Blade. This is an important synergy ability that allows Cloud to team up with Aerith to deal a decent amount of range damage. But perhaps the more important aspect is that it grants access to Cloud's second limit break, Ascension. From here, you will want to learn the powerful Punisher stat boost, as this adds 3% damage to Punisher mode strong attacks, before learning the Counterfire Synergy skill. This serves as a more effective defensive skill, as when damage is inbound, Cloud can team up with a party member to deal a swift counterattack. On the other side of the folio is Relentless Rush, which sees Cloud combine with Tifa to increase stagger time and also enhance damage output. But this cannot be learnt without first learning a stat boost, so we're going to want to learn Enhanced Attack, which will bridge the gap. From there, the next thing to learn is Melee Blade. This is an incredibly powerful synergy skill that will see Cloud team up with either Tifa or Aerith depending on whether you want to do a physical or magical attack. This can deal huge amounts of damage, especially when attacking a staggered enemy. And it doesn't cost any ATB, so it can be super useful if you either enter a stagger with no ATB and want to gain some fast while dealing high damage, or vice versa, whether you're at the end of the stagger window with no ATB left. From there, what stat boost you learn will depend on your playstyle. If you prefer to be more of a counter puncher, then Formidable Counter is worthwhile, while weapon ability damage up is also very useful. Now, by this point in the game, even though the party will have access to a few different types of materia due to limited slots, the actual setup doesn't make too much difference. As Cloud is an all-rounder, this means you can have him as a backup healer and spellcaster, or you can focus more on boosting his defensive abilities by equipping independent materia such as Steadfast Block or Precision Defense Focus. There's no right or wrong answer, so feel free to experiment based on how you like to play and how much of a challenge you're finding the various boss encounters. By now though, hopefully you're feeling a bit more confident about playing as Cloud Strife in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. If you have any tips though, be sure to leave them in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this guide or found it useful, please feel free to like the video. Make sure to also subscribe, as we're planning to produce more guide-based content in the future. Alright everyone, with that, this is Darryl signing out. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Snow, The Livestream, Gregory, Justin Dent and Sukun TDK, who are super special Onion supporters, and of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.